So now we're going to switch gears. We're going to talk about really dive deeper into some of the topics that both Dan Erickson and General Richardson spoke about, specifically economic security as national security. And our fireside chat is between the president and CEO of the Business Executives for National Security, General Timothy Ray, and the founding director of the FIU Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom, Dr. Carlos Diaz-Rosillo. Please help us to give a round of applause to both of them. General Ray, Carlos.
Where you like? Thank you so much for being here. As you heard, my name is Carlos Diaz-Rosillo. I'm the founding director of the Adam Smith Center for Economic Freedom, a think and do tank here at FIU that works at the intersection of public policy and the free market. And today we're truly honored to be with General Ray. I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes telling you about him, not that he needs any introduction, but I got to follow sort of the protocol, and then we're going to engage into a conversation with him. As we meet today and tomorrow in the conference to discuss some of the most pressing security issues facing our hemisphere, I'm humbled to join in this conversation, one that I know will be enlightening and thought-provoking. With a career spanning over 3 decades in the United States Air Force, General Ray's insights are invaluable. As you all know, General Ray is a highly decorated, retired United States Air Force 4-star general. There's not many 4-star generals. You know, this is a big deal. I was doing the research, and in the history of the country, there have been only a little over 200 Air Force 4-star generals. So it's really a privilege to have someone like him with us. He most recently served as commander of Air Force Global Strike Command and as the commander of Air Force's Strategic Air at the U.S. Strategic Command, with a focus on strategy and operational excellence. He also served as a member of the Air Force's corporate board of senior leaders, shaping future force structure, modernization, and budget priorities for the United States Air Force. Before that, he served as the deputy commander of the U.S. European Command, and before that, he held many other important positions in the Air Force. And we don't have time to go over all of them because I want to hear directly, and I'm sure you want to hear directly from him. So I'm gonna cut short his brilliant military career. He's widely recognized for developing, fielding, operating, and sustaining security capabilities as a result of his vast experience and insights across multiple disciplines. And his leadership extends beyond the military. Right now, he's the president and chief executive officer of Business Executives for National Security, where he has emerged as a preeminent figure in shaping the future of global security. Again, I could go on and on about him, but I'd rather hear directly from him. So please join me in extending a warm welcome to General Ray. And so I want to begin by asking you about what you're doing now. Now that you've transitioned from the military into the Business Executives for National Security, what do you do now?
Yeah, thank you, Carlos. And first of all, thanks to the team for having this phenomenal event. I think this is very timely and appropriate. Thank you for your service. It's a pretty incredible resume, so it's an honor to be up here with you today. Business Executives for National Security is a very interesting organization. It's a nonprofit. It brings elite business leaders together, and the idea is that we provide expert insights from the business world, either from a geopolitical, economic dimension, infrastructure, other kinds of developmental opportunities for the government, State Department, Commerce, DoD. And it's an incredibly interesting opportunity to bring bright, successful people with great insights into a conversation that now, I think more than ever today, we need the best of all these particular institutions, you know, of the federal government, of industry, and certainly what we can do with our military, talking with our partners and allies. There's a lot of broad observations. What BENS does is it gets into the business scene and begins to tease out those nuances to go from what to how. And so it's a phenomenal group of people. It's fascinating work and it's very, very rewarding.
So now that you've changed lines of work, what keeps you up at night?
So a lot of us at the four-star level get that question. Sometimes it's surprising. I mean, I spent my entire adult life in uniform. And so most of my first question of the day isn't what's most concerning, but I either wore the blue thing or I wore the green thing. And now that, my wife is taking care of her mom in Colorado, I have to come to work every day and hope that my clothes match. I mean, so that's probably my first concern, but it's a growth thing for me. But I think about problems out there. Things that worry me are a lack of a normative media environment that gives us a chance for a common civil discourse. I mean, things have become, a little bit more marketized. I worry about the ability to have a civil discourse. And that's what I love about this forum is that you can have a dialogue in the academic environment. You can bring in business leaders, you can bring in governmental leaders and the like and have a good conversation. The second, of course, is the national debt. And when I think about, those things, what can I do? I look at that as an opportunity to say, there's probably not the connective tissue or the synergy with this great particular experiment we call America and the idea of peace, freedom, and democracy. We're probably not playing as strong a game. And so when I think about my time, it's how do I come into that and try to find ways to tease out some better performance. So
And,
that's what
and the national debt is a big deal, not only in terms of the actual size of the debt, but the portion of, as a proportion of the country's GDP.
Correct.
It's huge.
It is significant. So I think we've got the resources and the talent. We just need to make sure it's on the field working together.
Let me ask you about another challenge. It was pretty clear from the previous panel that China is at the center of our attention. In the Western Hemisphere, the Chinese, and I should say throughout the world, we're talking about the Western Hemisphere, but this is the same case in parts of Asia, same case in Africa, especially in Africa, and the Western Hemisphere. The Chinese have, over the past couple of decades, in a very strategic, intelligent way, bought access to airports, ports, roads, bridges, critical infrastructure. How concerned should Americans be about Chinese, I'm going to say, quote unquote, interference in the Western Hemisphere?
I think we need to be concerned. I think you've got to really come down on one side or the other of three key points. First, are we worried more about a system, a globalized system that features, sovereign rule, free markets, peace, freedom, democracy, and growth, or we want to compete with China? Because I think those are two different things. If you want to promote one, China's a significant artifact inside of that, but then you've got transnational, criminal organizations. You've got more challenges out there. It's really the broader challenge. The second part is acknowledging how comprehensive it is. It's not one or two things. It's diplomacy, it's development, it's security. You've heard that at great volume here, and we're going to continue to hear that. Question is, how do you get after it? And I think the third thing that you have to remember here is, we have a phenomenal amount of things going for us. We have tremendous strengths here. One of our members was making the observation, and she spends a lot of time in Africa. She goes, and don't forget, sir, we've got Beyonce, right? When there's a Chinese rapper or things of culture that now begin to permeate other parts of the world, that's when we should be very worried. But it teases out the question of, are you a preferred security partner? Are you a preferred, economic partner? Or are you a preferred strategic partner? And I think the strategic partner is those two things together. And so when we think about what we bring to the table and what actually stands in contrast to what the Chinese bring to the table, it's actually, you just play the game as best you can and be the best version of yourself. And I think that's probably the best one.
So you mentioned strategic partner, security partner, trading partner. Are they one and the same? Are they different?
They're very different. You can look at different countries that have a very strong connection from the military to military, their affinity for Western training, Western equipment. some of those bilateral, multilateral security arrangements, those will be there. But that doesn't mean that those translate necessarily into the stronger economic ties. All right. So there's sometimes a little bit more of a pragmatic or a transactional nature for some countries as they choose different ways of doing things. There is a non-aligned world, right? As we watch Ukraine and whatnot, we see that countries choose a non-aligned, self-interested path there. And so you've got to be able to understand your strengths. I go back to that point, who you are, make sure you keep those strong, but then lean in with your other resources and play the best version of your game to make sure that you can continue to erode any advantage perceived or otherwise that the Chinese may have, or some other player that has a different, what we call economic partnership advantage. And I think those, if we can let those be transactional, that'll be okay.
In your current position as president and CEO of Benz, you get to deal with a lot of business leaders. The job of a business person is, of course, to make money, to make sure his or her business is profitable. But I believe that the private sector could be critical in helping to advance American national security. We heard in one of the questions in the previous panel about the port of Shanghai in Peru. And the person who asked the question was right in that Peruvians would prefer to have an American company build the port and run the port. But there was no bid. American companies did not bid. Therefore, the Chinese got it. Mm-hmm. How do we encourage the private sector to actually go into these, in the case of the Western Hemisphere, to be present, to bid, to make sure that they're the ones investing as opposed to the Chinese or any other foreign power?
Hey, we talked a little bit about how at times people can talk past each other. And if you really think about the complexity of this world, it's going to take a lot more synergy. I believe when you look at that conversation, we tend to, I think, the different, the IDC, all those efforts to loan money and work, I think those are phenomenal. They've shown some agility in their policy. Benz went to Benin and Cote d'Ivoire recently, and we drew out some observation. We shared them with State and Commerce. And one of the observations was make it a better environment to bid on, right? And not just insist on bidding. And so you can do a lot more to help countries improve their credit rating. You can help them with projects to help them have their data more discoverable in any due diligence conversation, right? So these are U.S. taxpayer dollars that are underwriting a loan. And I think it's important too that we tease out it's a loan, therefore there has to be margins and off takes on that. It's business. And so there's a due diligence. Otherwise we just give it and call that a grant, you know, or aid. This is about business processes, and there's got to be, you know, solid dimensions to it. But we see an opportunity to help, you know, improve financial systems and processing of data. You could clearly make the case that maybe there's a conditionality dimension where you want to get away from a Huawei. If you want to have, you know, more access to Western markets, we want to know that your data is more discoverable, that you've got a very safe and secure transactional system. There's things that kind of, you know, miss the eye when you look at what's actually investable. Because the business leaders that I work with will look at that and go, yeah, I would do it if the credit rating was X. Right. And here's what you would do to improve the credit rating. So it goes beyond just saying, hey, do better, do more. There's nuance and I think very important things. And that's what I love about Benz is that I watch some of these experts go and they'll tell us things that nobody in the diplomatic, academic, or you know, the government side will ever tease out unless that's their world. And that's the beauty of Benz, is to bring that into the table to where there's now a very workable, feasible solution.
I've heard you say before that the day is coming when the factory worker, say in Ohio, is as important as a U.S. Marine. When the work of a young civilian engineer or the work that a young civilian engineer is doing on our power grid is as important as the F-35 fighter on the front lines. Talk a little bit about that. What do you mean by that?
It's a little provocative to an extent, but I think if I were to say that 10 years ago, you would think I was, you know, off my rocker. I think you're closer to the day where we would now acknowledge a secure grid, a more effective and efficient American worker, right? A more capable set of supply chains that were going to continue to operate in a globalized economy. That is incredibly important. COVID taught us a lot of our fragility, right? It gave us some sense of what's in there, and you can't just respond with onshoring or grabbing it. You know, I think the CHIPS Act was a great story of small yard, high fence, and the appropriate approach. But then if you just continue to evolve that, you know, how secure is your grid? There's a cyber dimension, there's a reliability, there's a weather piece. And so if you think about the centrality of what we do in America for our structure, it actually becomes a very bipartisan conversation about, you know, making sure we do smart things and we tap into the real gifts of this country. And I think that's really important. But you can see if you lose sanctuary, you become different. Kissinger used to criticize Europe for their realpolitik. We had the Monroe Doctrine. We had sanctuary here in the Western Hemisphere. Our foreign policy and our national values could be the same thing. You've lost informational sanctuary, you've lost physical sanctuary, you've lost economic sanctuary. We got to kind of fight back for that. And that means that what we do every day in America isn't just business. It's stability. It is, you've heard the words up here before, economic security is national security. And I think that's a much more appropriate way of looking at it.
Which, by the way, the phrase economic security is national security appears in the 2017 National Security Strategy.
Yeah, you could take these themes, you're right. I mean, you could go back 20 decades or two or three decades of national security strategies, and they don't change fundamentally. They really don't. They do on the margins, and they talk about partners and allies. They talk about industry.
It's very consistent.
Very consistent. Now, today, in 2024, it is so much more appropriate, and we've got to get really good at that game.
And another one of the lessons that COVID taught us is not only the fragility, but also that what happens on the other side of the world matters here. And right now, we have a war in Ukraine. We have a war in the Middle East. And many Americans are wondering, you know, how does it impact what we do? Why should we spend so much money, so many resources on the other side of the world? What do you tell an American in Iowa or anywhere else in the country who's thinking, with so many domestic issues at home, so many pressing issues, why should we care about foreign policy?
Maybe to be a little, maybe this is a gamble, but if inflation doesn't really come down and we don't take rate cuts, it's probably the idea that the global supply chains, the globalized economy that we work with has not allowed us to be just able to focus on America, right? So we did look at Ben's at the price tag of what the Houthis have done to drive shipping around South America versus to go through the Med. You're going to deal with a lot of globalized supply chain, globalized economic realities. And the more instability that there is in a globalized system, it's going to play here. We looked at the biotech reality that we're dealing with here in 2024. It is irreversibly a global system. We are totally dependent on other parts of the world, and you can't sort it out. The visibility of the supply chains will never let you see it happen until the thing you depended on disappears. And so you're going to have to hopefully drive more stability so that the supply chains are more predictable. I mean, I think that's just brass tacks how it's going to play.
If we look at the Western Hemisphere, are there any blind spots on U.S. foreign policy? Any areas, any issues where you think we're not doing what we need to be doing to address those issues?
That's a great question. You know, if I were to pick a place that made me step back and really scratch my head, it's the arc of Mexico in the next 3 to 5 years. It's right there on our border. It's a source of significant Chinese focus, solid economy. It benefits from the right kind of trade tariff relationships. You know, there is a lot of different things that play with the U.S. and Mexico. And to know that we've got a great strategy. There was a great article in Foreign Policy yesterday I thought was pretty good. It kind of informed that, yeah, we need to really pay attention. This is going to be a bigger problem for us unless we really take a more comprehensive approach to it. So I mean, I'm sure we could take a list of issues from any other country, but the one that jumped out at me, surprisingly, is Mexico.
And Mexico just became the US's #1 trading partner. And so our biggest trading partner.
Yeah.
Do you be willing to take audience questions?
Absolutely, sure.
As we get ready for you to take your questions, please come up to the microphone. Let me conclude with a question that I always like to ask leaders who come to our center, because we have a lot of young people here in the audience, young people I'm sure watching remotely. And as you read the news, as you watch the news, there's a lot of negativity about people in public service. The military does a little better, but in general, there's a lot of negativity. And as a young person is thinking about potentially becoming a public servant or serving in the military, they're weighing in their options, making a lot more money in the private sector or entering into a field where the headlines are not always the most positive. Why should a young person choose public service? In any of its forms?
Wonderful question. I wasn't smart enough early in life, but I got smarter later in life. And my kids my youngest is 21. And I told them early enough that you need to consider living a life of significance, not of success. There's a fundamental difference between those two things. And if you live a life of significance, then you're never gonna doubt what you did. You probably will never regret not making more money. But I'm very proud of where my 4 kids are, and that's where their hearts are today. But I think added to that, the world that we would call the noble professions, to teach, to preach, to heal, and protect, that was the easy shot group. We just had this conversation, protecting the grid, to do a better job at STEM, at education, to make sure that we've got the right systems, to be involved economically with partnerships, et cetera. I mean, the world of national security is just growing. And so the things that we do every day for a job, it can either be in the context of making a paycheck, or it can be in the context of both having a paycheck and making a difference. And I think more and more of those opportunities are going to present themselves.
Great. All right. Go for it.
Hi, thank you for being here. My name is Alfredo Moreno, and I'm a journalist at Latin American News Dispatch. I was particularly intrigued by Dr. Diaz-Rocio's question about how you encourage American companies to invest in Latin America. And as you know, a portion of economic activity involves the extraction of primary products, like those in agriculture and metals. So I was wondering if businesses are thinking about how human rights and environmental sustainability can encourage that business environment. And yeah, if you could just expand on that, please.
Yeah, good question. And I'll kind of elevate a little bit more. What I saw in Africa and Benin and Cote d'Ivoire was a really smart move on the part of those countries to do more in the value proposition of those resources. We should be really, really proud to help any countries, bolster the made in wherever that country is. When we talked a little bit about China, China's not interested in that. But, you look at Africa and South America, there's a tremendous amount of labor who could be doing phenomenal things. I would love to know that the resources were actually turned into products in that country and exported that way. And that's a much better value proposition. That's not where the Chinese are going, right? They tend to be a little bit more isolated and bring in their own people. But I think we can, as a country, suggest strongly about the value proposition of taking those resources and turning into a finished good and making it a tighter part to grow the particular labor base. And of course, that's going to drive education. But there's also this ability to step in and, business is business. It can't operate for free, but there's ways that you could create the competitiveness and the value proposition in the margins, right? Our government's really good at underwriting loans and creating an investable place. But then I think if you season it with a little bit more of the things that we do for education, clarity on data, making it a more investable, discoverable place, and take that value added dimension of the local worker then I think you've got a much better formula than what we're ever going to see for any other competitor in this environment.
So just to be sure, you think that investing in human rights and environmental sustainability can increase the value proposition of
Flip it.
resources the other
Flip
way
it.
around?
Yeah, invest in those things and let that bring that along. Because what you feature as your primary purpose to somebody who needs a job, I think lead with that, but then make sure that it's going to deliver. I think China's actually got a credibility problem on the ESG front. So I don't think that's one of those where you have to lean on that as much. That's actually the easy part. It's putting local workers to work, doing things in the value chain. There it is. And a value chain that actually matches that model. I think that's a much better approach.
Great.
Thank you.
Next question.
General, thank you for your time. Nacho Canepa again, managing editor from DEF magazine from Argentina. How will AI, artificial intelligence, impact in national security, and which role have the public sector, the private sector, or the tech enterprises?
Boy, if I'd be a billionaire if I knew the answer to that one. I think it's the reality part of the landscape. We've got space, we've got cyber, we've got a connected world. AI is just a manipulation of the data that's out there. We've got to make sure that we're very ethical in our applications. You can use AI to protect yourself from bad AI. What I'm focusing my organization on is we have 4 focus areas. It's geopolitical, economic competition, it's the infrastructure, it's scaling, technology for DoD, and human capital. In that second area, the resilience of our grids, the resilience of our infrastructure is probably, for me as a business place, the best place to start for having a much clearer context for the question. Because right now the context is all over the place. But you need a lot of AI to run a smart grid. And oh, by the way, you need a lot of energy to run AI, right? So if you start there, and you need a lot of cybersecurity because of the SCADA systems. So I would say as the business world, the broader piece, and from a national security standpoint, you got to start there. There has to be a coherency in that approach. That's where I'm going to focus Ben's here in the next 12 to 18 months to help season that particular conversation. But I mean, it's wide open what AI can do. And the ability to drive it, I just don't think that's there. You're going to have to kind of hang on.
And the private sector is up to the task? I mean,
I think they are. I think, are they up to the task by themselves? You'll get some good things. But if you're more integrated from a diplomacy, from a security, if you can get better synergy between industry, Congress, and the rest of the government, then I think you find the right problems to solve and focus on first. I think focus is one of the problems, right? I can do lots of things, but I got to make sure I do the right things first. And you got to have the right questions on the table to drive the debate.
Thank you. So we're technically out of time, but let's take one more question because this is really interesting. Go for it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I'm Dr. Sandra Quincoses. I have about 10 years experience doing open source intelligence and investigating information operations and exposing it publicly, especially focused on Latin America. Many of those operations are run by US adversaries for political gain and economic opportunities on their end to diminish some of the challenges the U.S., in pressuring, governments. So with that background, my question to you is, does perception of the U.S. government have an impact on economic partnerships and business endeavors in the region? And if so, how does the private sector navigate those challenges?
Yeah, let me slightly reshape the question. I think I will answer your question. If I wanted to compete with the Chinese, if that was the specific question, step one, show up. Show up with purpose and presence. Step two, take credit. I mean, there are millions of people in Africa that are alive today because of USAID, right? We don't take credit for the kinds of things we do from a philanthropic standpoint, from a governmental standpoint. We took our report from the Africa trip, Benin, Cote d'Ivoire. We shared it with the Undersecretary of State for Diplomacy and Public Policy. Strongest recommendation in there was to take credit. It's been a policy of the American people to kind of let the government stand on its own and let us be behind. I think those days are over. I think that's where we really have to lean into that, and then play to your strengths, right? Play to our Beyonce, play to our, our philanthropic standpoint, play to our training and education. Bloomberg is running a phenomenal program to train mayors. I mean, running something is hard. Running a big city is really hard. And so the Chinese aren't doing that, right? So to become that security partner and that trading partner, you can play this game in a way that no one else is going to play it. So play to your strengths and then tell the story. I think lots of opportunities there. There's more probably being done that we take credit for. And if you saw it on a regular basis, by the way, it's not going to play in the mainstream media because it's not what people are focused on, then I think you see a very different story. A reason to actually be hopeful, I think.
Thank you.
That's right. I mean, millions and millions of people risk their lives to come to the US, not to go to China. So on that note, thank you, General.
This is wonderful.